Hello, everybody. We'll get started shortly. I see that people are still coming in the room, so we'll give a few more minutes for people to join, and then we will start. Okay, it's now 12:30. There are still people coming in. I'm going to give 2 more minutes, and then we'll start. All right, we have 1 more minute before we start. People are pouring in, guys, so I'm just trying to give everyone an opportunity to come in so that we all can start at the same time. Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roxy Farrow. I'm the operations manager here at the Human Trafficking Legal Center. I'm also a survivor leader, and I assist with running the program of survivor leadership here with the Human Trafficking Legal Center. We want to get started really quickly. We're going to first start with introductions, and then from there, we'll have a brief word from Savannah Sanders, a survivor leader as well, about Survivor Alliance, an organization started by survivors and ran by survivors for survivors. I want to do some housekeeping first so that everyone knows where everything is. If during the presentation you have a question, please feel free to click on the question box. That should be at the bottom of your screen, and some people might have it on the right or left hand of their window. You can type in your questions, and one of our organizers will see your question, and we will answer it as the webinar goes on. We also will have a brief period at the end for question and answers. So another thing I wanted to make everyone aware about is the handouts that are also attached to the platform. You can look at the handouts, which include the PowerPoint for this webinar. It also includes a one-pager for Human Trafficking Legal Center and the services that they provide, as well as a one-pager from Survivor Alliance and how you can learn more about the organization, as well as how survivors can join. Okay? All right. So let's start. I would like to introduce our presenter today, Katie VonDeLinde, social worker. She's also an educator and activist, and she's working on issues of survivor-centered intimate partner violence with CSAJ, or Center for Survivor Agency and Justice. Today, she will speak about how credit can be effective in survivors' lives, as well as understanding the credit game to increase economic choices for survivors of human trafficking. Before we start, I would like to make the announcement that this webinar is being recorded, as well as this is not just a survivor only space, but we also invited service providers. So service providers, if you have questions, please feel free to participate. And at any time you wish not to give your questions, you can also submit them anonymously via email. And you can email me at roxy@htlegalcenter.org. Okay, with any further ado, I would like to pass over the mic to Savannah. Savannah, are you there?
I am here. Thank you so much, Roxy. My name is Savannah Sanders, and I'm a program coordinator at Survivor Alliance. And we are a membership-based organization that is survivor-led and survivor-ran. We are international, so we have services all over. And excuse me, I have a little baby that's in the background. And we have services in the UK, the United States, and all over the world. And when I say services, we specifically provide access to different leadership training. We provide connection and networking and opportunities for consulting and an array of other services. If you are a survivor of any form of exploitation, you can join our membership-based organization by going to our website at survivoralliance.org. And opportunities for jobs and leadership will be sent to you, and there's also a way to connect with other survivors across the world.
Okay, thank you so much, Savannah. And now let's go ahead and move on to our presenter, Katie. I'm gonna go ahead and change this so that you will be able to share your screen.
Great to see everybody today. Well, I don't really see you, but I feel your presence, and it's wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to talk today. So as we get started, I want you to do a few things. I want you to think about kind of what will it mean for you today to be listening to this presentation, and be thinking about money, and recognize that this is all happening in the midst of a pandemic, and that we are experiencing all sorts of stress. So one of the things that I would like to challenge you to do today is try to figure out, is this a time where you could not multitask? Could you just think right now about economics and credit with us? What kind of gift would that be for yourself to just be able to think about one thing at once? And the other thing I want to do today as we get started is think about what is one thing that you do well when it comes to money. And I believe that Roxy has a poll for us within that. Let's see. So the poll just gives us some options about what you do well when it comes to money. When I've worked with survivors around issues of economics for over 20 years, and what I find is that many folks oftentimes feel like they don't do anything well with money, or they think about the things they don't do well. But all of us have something that we do well when it comes to money, whether it's spending it, whether it's really cutting corners on where we're spending money. And so I just wanted to give the opportunity to see where people are. So Roxy, can you see the poll and what's happening there?
I see, and people are giving in answers.
Oh, awesome.
I'm gonna give it a few more seconds, and then we will take it down. But I can give you the results right now. It looks like,
let's hear it. Let's hear it.
So the options are spend it, save it, invest it, donate it, or money, what's that? So it looks like 42% of our audience say that they spend it, 39% of our audience save it, 3% of our audience invest it, 12% of our audience donate it, and 3% of our audience is like, money, what's that?
All right, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for starting to think about that and what that looks like for everybody. So I also want to, as we get started, my name is Katie, as I said, my pronouns are she, her, hers. And so I want to get you to kind of also think about where you are when it comes to thinking about money. For you right now, what does money mean for you? What has it meant in your life? What does it mean? What would it mean, and what would it look like for you to be economically secure? And then what are the things that get in the way of economic security in life? Because credit is just one piece, and it's actually one small piece as we're thinking about it for many of us when we think about what economic security is. And then I want you to think about, how has credit played a part in the barriers for you when it comes to moving towards economic security? So that will just kind of get us started as we think about economics and credit. What I also want to say is that when it comes to credit and thinking about it, is that there's a lot of information, a lot of details, and I always call it the credit game, because we're always trying to figure out how companies are trying to figure out where they can get the most money from us. And so we, as people that are a part of the system, whether we want to be or not, have to figure out what the rules are to those games as they change. And so I want to acknowledge that 1 hour presentation is probably not going to be enough to answer all your questions, and that really a lot of this credit work is individualized because so many of the questions are very specific to our own situations. And I want to empower you that by getting a little bit of information about credit or building on what you already know, you can do this work. The way that I learned how to do credit work is by sitting with myself and sitting with survivors, and then finding people in my community who are doing credit work. And they may not have had the safety lens, but I could apply that safety lens and to the information that they were giving to me about credit. So I encourage you to think about, where are resources for you? Is it, do you have a consumer credit counseling organization? A lot of legal service organizations have a consumer lawyer who are oftentimes less busy than the other lawyers in the organization. Are there organizations, anti-poverty organizations in your community that would be helpful? But again, what I think you bring and what we can bring together is thinking about, how does safety overlie that? So a lot of people, when they talk about credit, they always say, you do this, you don't do this, and there's almost like there's a formula. But when I know the work that I've done in my own life and with survivors, is there isn't a perfect formula for all of us. We have to figure out how we can work with our credit, but also always be thinking about safety and how safety is intertwined with some of our credit issues and credit concerns. So what is credit? We're talking about this thing, but what is it? I think it really is this whole system of a way to get money. Many of us need a certain amount of money to buy bigger purchases, to be able to have access to things like cell phone contracts, to be able to get insurance, car insurance. People are looking at our credit. But really, credit is any time that somebody's giving you some money and that you are not giving it that back all at once. So you're paying them back over time, or in a certain amount of time. So we have this formal system of credit, and this is what we usually think about when we're talking about credit, and what we're kind of mostly talking about today. And the formal system of credit is all connected to our banking system, and is connected to our credit reporting organizations that are within the United States. But we also know that there's informal credit systems that people oftentimes use to be able to get money. So many times people use family members or communities that come together to give money. There's also other people that might be doing lending, that might be payday lenders. And while payday lenders will give us credit, they are typically not thought of as the formalized credit system, because those payday loans are not reported to the credit bureaus. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more. But we know that it's this weird system that we have all these numbers that are kind of put into a computer. We'll talk about that more in a later, that shows how trustworthy or not we are in order to somebody to decide whether or not they will give me credit. And it's this really impersonal system, and it used to be that people would have relationships, and between those relationships they could make that decision. But we don't have those relationships anymore. So businesses want to figure out, are you a good risk? Is this somebody that I think I'm going to get my money back from or not? And if it is not a good risk, if I think that I'm going to get it might be a risk for me to get my money back, I'm going to charge these higher interest rates. I'm going to get more money back based on this. So I think it's really important to think about that, and as we hear about this. And what we know within the United States also is that many of us have this feeling of feeling like if we don't have good credit, that there's something wrong with us. There's something inherently wrong with us, or that people don't see us as trustworthy. And we're going to be talking about that in a little bit as well. So why does credit matter? Why are we talking about it? What's the big deal? And we know that our credit history is becoming more and more important in the United States as people are making decisions about what happens. So people look at our credit history for a lot of employment. So formalized employment, employers might pull our credit report to see what's happening. And there's been some really interesting discussion they could do a job. And employers have an argument that they say that it shows that people are going to be trustworthy in jobs and not steal money. But we don't actually have really good evidence that that is true. So it's something I think that we can continue to work on and push people on. We know that credit history makes a big deal when it comes to getting an apartment, or to renting a home, or to buying a home is going to really big. We also know it has to do with our access to transportation. So cars and getting a car loan is really related to our credit, and also insurance. So our car insurance companies are going to charge us more money, again, based on our credit score. And we can kind of question this again, is this right or is this not right? But for now, it is the reality. We also know that some of our utilities are based on our credit, and that we'll be talking about that later, why that's interesting. And then cell phone contracts. And for many of us, cell phones are no longer kind of a luxury. They're a safety need, and they're also just a need that we have to, especially today during coronavirus, we have to be able to connect with people in that way. So credit does seem to matter, but does having good credit really mean that you're trustworthy, or does having bad or no credit mean you're not trustworthy? And I'm here to say that it has nothing to do with your trustworthiness. That many folks have no or not good credit based nothing on the choices that they've made or what they've done. It's just been their history and things that have happened for them or to them, or their lack of access to having information about credit, or having an ability to get good credit. And so you can be an amazing, trustworthy person and still be struggling with your credit score or struggling with credit. And I think that's a really important thing that we don't talk a lot about in the United States. So what is our credit affected by? Many of us may have challenges with our credit due to our life experiences. So I have a lot of folks that I've worked with who come into their own adulthood having had a credit on where a parent had used their credit to maybe get a utility. And so as that person's going out into their own life, they're already starting with a negative credit score. We know that there's also life experience that happened based on survivorship that can impact our credit, which we'll talk about more. We also know that there are a lot of barriers due to lack of access. So depending on where you grew up, in what community, we know that communities of color have traditionally not had as much access to banking institutions and credit in a way that has been really impacted by white supremacy and power. And so we know that women, cis women, we know that trans folks, we know that due to homophobia, due to immigration status, due to language, all of these issues may make it difficult for people to have access to credit, or to have reasons to have credit that is not as good as they would like it, not due to anything of their own, but because of the access that they've had or the things that they've had to do in their life to survive. We also know that folks with legal issues, that shows up on a credit report as well, which can also be challenging as people are trying to get housing or secure employment. We also know that this is a really confusing system. And if you haven't had somebody sit down and talk with you more about credit, that there can be some things that just, mistakes that you made just because you don't have that information. So just, again, setting the stage that you are not your credit, that because of things that have happened to you in your life, that doesn't make you not trustworthy. And it also, the great news about credit is that there are things we can do about it. There are things that we can do to repair credit, to work on that. So just want to encourage you that there's always opportunity to build our credit. We also know that based on experiences of trafficking and exploitation, that really impacts lots of folks' credit and the credit situation. So we know that one thing that traffickers and that also sometimes family members or maybe an intimate partner uses as a way to increase power and control is economic abuse. And I'm sure a lot of you can think of different examples of economic abuse that you've either heard or you've experienced in your own life. And we can think of it in two different pieces. One, which is economic restriction. So how has this person or family member or trafficker or a partner, ex-partner impacted your ability to either use your money or to use money that you're supposed to have access to, or restricting you in a way of not being able to get access to things that you want and you need. A lot of times, again, with folks that I've worked with, it might be not being able to access employment in a way that is safe and in a way that their partner is allowing them to do that. We also know that economic abuse includes economic exploitation. And this is really using the survivors, your resources for the partners, the traffickers, the family members, whoever's using the economic abuse to their own advantage. So it might be using your money, having your money or property stolen. And then what we'll talk about a little more is creating debt in your name. And this is a challenge that continues to come up for folks in trying to figure out what's happening in terms of their finances. I also saw in my own experiences a lot of economic abuse and kind of lack of access to economic gain. So I've had a lot of folks that I've worked with that when they were trying to get more economic security, like by getting a job or getting education, that their trafficker, their partner would burn their books or stop giving access to their uniforms for work, or doing things like sabotaging. They said they would watch the kids and then at the last minute not do that. So a lot of things that make economic security really challenging. So when we talk about creating debt in survivors' names, we see two different pieces of this as well. We see fraud and we see coercion. So fraud is when a person uses your personal information to take credit out in your name without your knowledge. So it may be, and I see this a lot with people that they go online and they know all the information, all of your personal information. They know your social security number, they know your last address, and so they apply for credit online using your information without you ever knowing it. Or it could be, I've seen people where they use your driver's license and you have somebody that kind of looks like you go and apply for credit in person using all of your information. And this is fraud. This is something that is illegal. It is also a form of identity theft. And so it's something to pay attention to. The one that can sometimes be more complicated in terms, well, they're both very complicated, but complicated in terms of what are the legal standards, is that there's this use of coercion. So using demands or threats to force you to take on debt that you never otherwise would have incurred. So, for example, forcing you to buy a TV that you never really wanted, but that person wanted to use. And so now this is a credit on your credit report. With a lot of survivors, I see a lot of debt being taken out in their name. So a TV, a car, an apartment, utilities, and then all the assets being in the name of the person that's using the abuse. And so we see this again as a challenge with economic security. So I'd love for you folks to kind of think about kind of how this is shown up in your lives or the lives of people that you know. We also know that another impact on credit is that it costs a lot to survive. There's costs of being a survivor, and that sometimes it means that you spend money differently, that you have experiences of challenges with health due to survivorship, challenges with addiction and kind of the impact that might have on your financial situation, or really just how you spend your money as a way to kind of take care of ourselves, and that might be might be impacts on how we spend our money. We also know that for many of us, when we have access to money, we want to make sure sometimes that we spend it ourselves so that somebody else doesn't come and take it from us. And while that might be a helpful strategy as we're coping in survivorship, as we move forward, that may be a strategy that actually is detrimental to our lives. So kind of sometimes changing those patterns of how we're using our money can be really challenging, but really important to think about. So I think this is just remembering that all of these factors may be playing a role of why we're having some challenges with our credit. So my overall theme with this is that I just want to remind all of us that we're not our credit, that there is, that we're trustworthy, we're amazing, we can do great things with our money, we can make great decisions with our money, and sometimes we can also make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that we are not worthy of having credit. So, as I said earlier, part of thinking about credit and dealing with credit is playing this game. So in order to sometimes play a game, you have to understand the different components of the game, and then how do you make sure you can know the components to use it for your advantage to do the best that you possibly can. So the first thing that may be important as you're understanding what your credit situation is absolutely looking at a credit report. So credit reports are available to all of us as consumers. We have access to one free credit report per year from each of the big 3 credit reporting agencies. So in the United States, the big three credit reporting agencies that are Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. So we have access to one of those per year. Also, if you are looking for a job, if you are receiving TANF, so temporary assistance to needy families, that gives you access to a free credit report. Also, if you've had any fraud, so if you've had somebody use your name, you can also access your credit report. One of the things to think about, and after you've sort of taken a look at all 3 of your credit reports and looked at them, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. One of the things that I do, and I encourage folks that I work with to do, is that after I've looked at all 3 for that 1 year, then later on, I am going to be, in years coming, I'm going to look at one credit report every 3 months so that I can continue to keep my eyes on it. Why do we have to keep looking at our credit reports? Well, we want to know what's on them, but we also want to see what mistakes are on them. So we know that 1 in 3 credit reports have some sort of error in them. And that's because we just have this huge credit reporting system with tons of information and tons of names that are similar and social security numbers that sometimes get mixed up. So we want to make sure that the correct information is on our report. Also, if we know that we've had a person that has used our credit before fraudulently, we want to make sure we understand what's happening with that credit report. So all this is to say, we also have to think about how to get a credit report safely. So for some of us, we may have had somebody that has stalked us, that has used our credit in the past, that knows our social security number. So what I want to remind you of is when you pull a credit report, you are going to have all sorts of information that you're going to have to include to get that credit report. And once you do that, include that information, that's all updated on your credit report. So if you are trying to hide from a person, if you've now moved states and now I'm applying for a credit report, I now have that new information to get my credit report. Now, if my ex-partner, trafficker pulls my credit report illegally, because they're not supposed to be able to do that, but if they have access to my information, they can do that illegally. They're not supposed to, but they might do it anyway. Now they have all of my updated information for my credit report. They can find me. So I have to be constantly thinking about what is the safest way to do this. So we could consider things like putting a different, an alternative address. And you can think about what this might look like, who you could maybe get access to that would be safe. I've also done things where I've worked with organizations in different cities. So they've pulled a credit report for me. So now it looks like my client, I'm in St. Louis, so it looks now like with a survivor that I'm working with is living in Seattle. So those are some strategies. You could also create a new credit email address if you're trying to hide that. to get the report. You know, of course, you want to remember what that email address is. If you're trying to hide the phone number, getting a second phone number for pulling your credit report that has no personal information. Also, there's more and more systems online to be able to get phone numbers that are linked to your phone number but aren't your actual phone number. So I would look at that online and Google some trying to get other phone numbers. So what you need when pulling a credit report is you need your name, your date of birth, your social security number, addresses, and then you have to answer security questions. So if any of you have had the problem of trying to pull a credit report and then you don't get it because you get your security questions wrong, that's not uncommon. It happens to many of us because they try to trick us with the questions. They want to really make sure that it's us. So one of the things, oh yeah, go ahead.
Yes, it's Roxy. I have a question about credit reports and pulling them.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference between the websites and Credit Karma?
Great.
From what I've noticed, yeah.
Go for it. What have you noticed?
No, I noticed that they may be different.
Right.
And can you just go into how they are different and how they report your credit scores different?
Great. So Credit Karma is going to be usually trying to merge all of those credit reports together and using information that they find as they look quickly at your credit file. And then using that information to give you a credit score. So if you want to look at more detail, you really want to get your credit report, your full credit report from one of the credit bureaus. Credit Karma is great to kind of keep an eye on what's happening, but I think annually getting an actual credit report from the credit bureaus can be really helpful. Many credit card companies also will give you a full credit report, or if you ever apply for credit, so if you, let's say you try to get a car and you get denied for getting that car, you can request a credit report to see why you were denied that credit. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good. So if you've tried to get your credit report and it's not working, you can try none of the above. That's oftentimes an answer that they give you. The other thing you can do is just try again, either with the same bureau or a different bureau. Eventually, if you just cannot get through the security questions, you can apply for a credit report by mail. It just is going to take a little bit more time. So one of the things I also want to remember is as you're pulling a credit report is that we have a lot of memories and a lot of feelings that are tied up with credit. And especially if we have been with somebody that has abused our credit, looking at a credit report or finding surprises on a credit report can bring up a lot of feelings of trauma, a lot of feelings of fear, of sadness, of frustration. And so getting the support you need and understanding as you pull a credit report, people oftentimes just think of it as kind of a black and white, I've got some numbers, it's not a big deal. But it brings up a ton of things for many of us. So kind of thinking about that as you're thinking about pulling a credit report is really, really important. For example, I've had survivors pull their credit report and find something on there that reminded them of a date or a certain hospital bill that reminded them of an incident. So making sure that you're getting the support you need as you think about pulling a credit report. So we've been kind of talking about these different things, but I want to be really clear that there are these differences. So we've been talking about getting a credit file or a credit report. A credit file is all of your information that's out there. And I just think of like this huge database, and all of the information that's about me, Katie Torba VonDeLinde, is in this big kind of vat of information. And anytime I want to know that information and I apply to see my credit report, they put all that information on a document, and that document is my credit report. And that credit report gives me all this sorts of information. And different bureaus are going to pull my credit report, and my credit report is going to look differently. So if I'm looking at Equifax, if I'm looking at Experian, if I'm looking at TransUnion, my credit report is going to look different, even though that file of information is the same. But maybe my TransUnion credit report doesn't show a college debt that I had because they're not reporting to TransUnion. So that's why I want to look as I'm starting to work on my credit at all three credit bureaus, at all of my credit reports to see what's on each credit bureau. So a credit report is, as I said, we get one free of charge once per year from each of the big credit bureaus. A credit score, which takes the information from our report and gives us a number, costs money. So we cannot get that free from the government at this time. We can get sometimes a credit score free from our credit card company, from Credit Karma, from other credit kind of websites that's going to give us the information. I would be very careful if I were you to apply. Oftentimes companies will say if you apply for this credit monitoring system, you can have it free for 30 days and then we'll give you your credit score. I would just be very careful because you don't need that credit monitoring system. You can do that yourself, but you might forget to kind of, I myself always forget those sorts of things, to turn that off, and then all of a sudden I'm paying for the system that I didn't need or have. So usually paying for a credit score, if you're going through the credit bureaus, is going to be between $7 and $15. The other thing is, again, if you're applying for credit, so if you're applying to get a car, a house, some sort of credit, and you can ask that company and say, hey, can you tell me what my credit score was when you pulled my credit report? So that's another way to get it. So how do they get the score? The score is really a formula that a business uses, and they keep those exact formulas secret. So we can't know exactly what the formula is, but we can know, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, a little bit about what they look at. So they do look at kind of our on-pay time history. That's the biggest chunk of money of what they're looking at when they're giving us our credit score. That's 35%. So if I'm paying my bills on time, that's going to be good for my credit score. Now, if I have a credit card bill and it's due December 1st, and I don't pay that credit card bill till December 15th, I'm going to be charged a fee because I've paid that late. But that is not going to be reported to the credit bureaus until I'm past 30 days late. So even though I'm technically late for the credit card company, I'm going to pay that fee unless I call and ask them to take that fee off, which you can also do, especially if you haven't had many late fees. I would always encourage you to call the companies and talk to them about that. But anytime you're 30 days late, that's going to show up in your credit report. Anytime that then becomes 60 days late, that's going to continue to show up on your credit report and impact your credit card score report negatively. So that's one thing that looks at your score. Another thing that they look at is the amount of debt. How much debt do you have out there? Because they're just trying to see how tapped out you are. How much money do you have out there? So that's another important thing. Another thing that is not really fair for those folks that are young is the length of accounts is something else they're looking at. So if you're a young person and you're just starting your credit world, or if you're an older folks, but you also are just starting out to building credit, you may be at a little bit of a disadvantage because you don't have that long-term history. And why are they looking at that long-term history? Because they want to make sure that their risk is low, and that you have this history of paying things back, which is also why they will ding you for new accounts. So if you have a number of new accounts, that is going to be also part of your credit score. So a lot of states now have laws that if you are trying to shop around for credit, so for example, if I was trying to get a home loan, for example, in Missouri, I have 14 days to shop around and try to look for a credit, for a loan that is the best deal for me. And when they do that, they're only pulling that report once. That's only going to impact my score once. And so kind of thinking about that as part of the new accounts process. The other thing they're looking at is the mix of credit. So they want to see that you have some installment credit. An installment is anything that you get a big chunk of money for at once, and then you pay it back over time. So a home loan is installment, a car loan is installment, a college education loan is installment. And they want you to see some installment and some revolving. And revolving is our credit card. And a credit card is something that you're going to be paying back every time that you use the credit card, and it revolves about how much credit that you have towards them. So a lot of us will start out only having revolving credit, which will then impact our credit score. So you can see as you look at these numbers why some of us have some challenge having a good credit score as we're trying to build our credit throughout our time. So that's a little bit about the score, but I want to go back to the report and kind of talk about what is on a credit report. Well, our personal history is on the report, which we talked about. Our personal information. So my address, my phone number, my date of birth. And this is important to check out as you're looking at your credit, because you want to make sure it's you, that it's right. A lot of people have similar names. You may have somebody that's a junior, and you want to make sure that that information is correct. The other thing that's going to show up, of course, is your credit history, which makes sense. That's what we're talking about today. But your credit history is going to have your open accounts, so anything that you're still kind of paying back on, and then any closed credit accounts, and those are going to stay up. If it's a good history of a good account, it's going to stay on your credit report for 10 years. So any open or closed account that's been closed within the last 10 years. It's also going to show any collections accounts. So let's say you had a utility that you were paying and you didn't pay it, it went into collections, that's going to show up on your credit report. It's also going to show your pay history. So how often did you pay on time? As I was saying earlier, it's going to show your 30, 60, 90 days late, and then 90 plus. It will also show when you open an account and when you closed an account. So that helps you look at your credit report and see, when did I open this account? And that's going to be helpful as you try to work on making sure that the correct information is on your credit report. Other thing on your credit report is going to be any public records. So this is through the court system. So any tax liens. So if you didn't pay your taxes back and they're pulling your tax, your refund every year, that's considered a tax lien. That's going to show up on your credit report. Any bankruptcy that you filed and that has a time frame as well. Debts that are in collection, and then any monetary judgment. So if you have an eviction with a monetary judgment, that's going to show on your credit report. If you have any judgments from, for example, a judgment might come from a credit card company, you didn't pay the credit card company back, they sued you in court, and they won that suit, and so now that judgment is going to show up on your credit report. The other thing that's going to show up are inquiries. So this is people that are looking at your credit report. And anytime that an inquiry is a hard inquiry, it's when you have asked for credit from somebody. So if I am saying, okay, I want to get a new credit card to Target, let's say. So I have applied for credit from Target. That's going to show up on my credit report as a hard inquiry. And that is going to impact my credit score for a few days, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, depending on what's going on. Because the companies are seeing, oh, Katie wants some more credit. So we need to make sure that her score goes down a little bit so she doesn't go out there and get a bunch of credit and then charge a bunch of stuff and then owe a bunch of money and not pay it back. However, there's also people that I like to kind of say they're peeking at your credit report at all the times, and those are soft inquiries. So maybe a company is saying, hey, MasterCard thinks that maybe I'd be a good person to get a credit card from them. So they might take a peek at my credit report, and I don't know that they're doing that. That's not going to impact my score. Also, any company that I have a relationship with is looking at me to see if I'm paying my bills back on time. They're peeking at my credit report, and that might be a soft inquiry. The other thing that's on a report is a consumer statement. You have the right to put a consumer statement on your credit report, and we'll look at what that looks like in just a little bit. So what isn't reported, and this is really what's important, is that oftentimes people think that they have things on their credit report or they have credit because they have paid bills back in the past. But when they pull their credit report, they see, oh my gosh, I don't have anything that's reported. So utilities that are not in collection are usually not reported on your credit report. So if you're paying back, you're paying your water bill on time, that's oftentimes not going to show up as a good line of credit. Why is that? Well, that's because the utility is saying, we're giving you a service, you're paying for that service. We're not giving you money and then you paying that back. However, once that utility goes into collection because you haven't paid it back, that's going to show up on your credit report. The other thing that doesn't show up on your credit report is payday or title lenders. And this is also important for a lot of folks that I've worked with, or is because we may have a payday lender that you've worked with for a number of years, you paid something back, and so you assume that you're going to have good credit. Well, that's not going to show up on your credit report as a good line of credit. You also may be paying bills like childcare or other things on time, rent, that's also not going to show up on your credit. However, If you need to get housing, apartments, you want some reference letters that may help you, these things can become good lines of credit. They're not reported on your credit report, but you can go to those people and say, hey, I've been paying my bills on time. This could be from your child care center, and say, could you write me a credit reference letter that says I am a good customer, I pay my bill every month. And what I've had luck with folks in terms of trying to get apartments, using some of those letters of reference and saying, hey, my credit report stinks because I was with this abusive person that really impacted my credit, but look, I pay my bills on time, I am a good bet, you need to give me this loan or this house. So there are some options for alternative lines of credit. So another thing to know when you're looking at credit and doing credit work is how long things are still on a credit report. Now this is important because you don't want bad things on your credit report that shouldn't be there anymore. And so you want to make sure they're off. The other thing is you want to, if there's something that you want to dispute, you want to know how long it's been on your credit report. So accounts that are paid as agreed should be on your credit report for 10 years. If you filed for bankruptcy, either Chapter 7 or Chapter 11, that's on your credit report for 10 years after it's discharged. So after it's gone through the process, it's 10 years. Unpaid tax liens are going to show on your credit report until they're paid. The government wants their money and they're going to get it. And so making sure that you kind of recognize that. Once you pay that tax lien back, that's going to show up in your credit report for 7 years. Again, federally backed student loans are going to show up on your credit report indefinitely until they're paid. Due to a lot of good advocacy around medical debt, medical debt they've been becoming more flexible with it. So it's removed from your consumer report when it's paid. So it's not going to stick on there like some other unpaid debt or debt that you pay and then it's on there for 7 years. Medical debt will come back off. It will also not go on your report until 180 days after the bill is due date, because we know a lot of us are dealing with kind of crappy insurance companies that are taking a long time to pay that money back, and so they're giving us this time frame before this is going to go onto our credit report. Then that was a part of a recent settlement with credit reporting agencies. Collection accounts will stay on your report for 7 years after the date of last activity, and any negative items will come off 7 years after date of last activity. So the important thing to remember is there's many important things to remember, but things to think about is if you have a negative item on your credit report. So let's say I had a bill that I never paid back that was for a jewelry company where they had loaned me. I got a credit card from a jewelry company and I bought some jewelry. I've never paid it back. Now 6 years have passed and I am trying to make a decision about how I'm going to repair my credit. I may not want to pay back that credit card if I have other credit cards that are much newer, because in a year that credit item is going to come off of my credit report. And if I pay that bill, any part of that has become a new activity. So now I have 7 more years that's going to be on my credit report. So knowing how long things are on your credit report is really important as you're trying to do credit repair for yourself.
Katie, can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, sure.
So what happens though because this is what I see a lot, is they keep reporting though, like every month. So it might be from like 6 years ago, but the most recent activity is actually just from last month, because they keep like if it's like a small credit card, but they keep reporting it every month. Does that count as last activity?
You can still dispute that. You would still dispute that if it wasn't off after 7 years, because the activity is not from the company. It should be activity that's happening between the consumer and the company.
Okay.
So they're going to keep reporting it. They're going to keep reporting it. They want you to re-engage with them at that point, especially. And so, but if once it's got to that 7 years, I would dispute it if it doesn't come off. Does that make sense? So So one of the things, as I said, you're going to be doing when you get your credit report is reviewing that credit report. So you're looking at it for accuracy, which we talked about. But the other thing you also want to look at is, do you recognize the accounts? So one of the things that can be confusing is sometimes companies sell their debt to other companies. So especially with student loans oftentimes pass through different hands. Home loans do this. And so you might think, oh my gosh, I don't know what this name of this lender is. But when you look at the dates, you say, oh yeah, okay, that was my student loan that I took out 10 years ago, and now somebody else has bought it and it's in this other hand. And so you know what that one is. But sometimes when you look through those, the dates don't make sense, and you can't make sense of it. Then you're dealing with thinking about, is there fraud on my account, and what do I do about that? So we'll talk about that in a minute. But we also want to be looking at, is any information past the time that's allowed based on what we just talked about. So if we have something that's been on there too long, or that is fraud, so that we don't recognize it, one of our options is to dispute the charge with the credit bureau. And how do we do that? Well, we make a copy of our credit report. We highlight any unfamiliar accounts. We copy any additional information to support the explanation. So if we have some information from a company, we can turn that in. We may not have it. A lot of folks that I work with don't have any supporting documents, but they're just disputing it. And you send all of that to the credit bureau. You can do this all online as well. And it usually, you can go through that process. I like having a paper trail, but you certainly can do it online if that feels more comfortable for you as well. So how does this work? Well, the company has to review your credit report. They have to look at it. They have 30 days to respond to your request. And you can also include a consumer statement, which we'll talk about in a moment as well, that might be put on that. But we also have a new law, or a new kind of rule within the credit world, that if there's a complicated credit dispute, a human being has to investigate that. So if you get something back after 30 days, and oftentimes what the agencies will say after 30 days is, thank you for your dispute, we're doing research into it. So they don't have to have a resolution to your question in 30 days. They just have to respond and say, we're looking into it. So if they don't have a resolution to that, or they come back to you and they say, oh, we found this, and this is what we found. And you still look at it and say, but that doesn't make any sense. I don't know what that is or who you're talking about. You can send that dispute back, and then they have to have a human being look into it, not just their computerized system. And I have found some good luck. Kind of sometimes you have to pester the credit reporting agencies, but that is also their responsibility to do that. So as I mentioned earlier, we can also put a statement on our credit report. So for those of us who have dealt with fraud, or maybe have dealt with a partner or trafficker using our credit without our permission, we have some options of what we can do. One is that we can include a credit statement on our credit report. We can have an up to 100-word explanation on our report that says, please do not extend credit to me unless I'm in person, you see my ID, or whatever you want to say on your credit report. Remember, if you say something on your credit report that if you know that somebody's stalking you and could pull your report, you don't want to put any information that could put you at greater risk from that person. The other thing that's kind of a pain about putting a credit statement on is that you have to renew it every 90 days. But sometimes it's not seen by computerized systems as well, so sometimes that can be a challenge. The one positive about using a credit statement in this way is that you don't have to file a police report to be able to have this credit statement. And I even have folks that I've worked with that have maybe are still with their partner, or still kind of in a dangerous situation. And what they've done is kind of say to somebody in their life, and they say, hey, I think I've heard this like interesting report on the news about identity theft, and I think maybe we both should put on our report that credit should only be extended if we're in person. And that might be a safer way to kind of have some statement on your credit report. But another option is, if you have you know that your report has been used fraudulently, and you feel safe using police and kind of understanding that can be a really complicated system based on our identities. But if you feel comfortable with that, there is an option to report your fraud to the police, because that will give you a police report, which then you can have an extended fraud alert on your credit report, which lasts for 7 years. That allows all creditors to get to kind of see that fraud alert, and that it also it gives you a little bit more safety than the other issue. I've had some problems sometimes with survivors who want to file a police report and the police won't take the report. So that's another challenge. And if you run into that, please contact me or a lawyer within your area. I'm not a lawyer, but I've helped people kind of work through this as well. Another thing that you can do in terms of increasing your safety with credit is to use a credit freeze. And credit freezes are becoming more and more common. Most states do not charge money. They used to charge money. Now they don't. But what it does is it stops access to your credit report to acquire any new debt. So I have my credit frozen at all times. So if somebody was trying to use my credit to get a credit card in my name, they would not be able to do that because my credit report would just say, nope, you can't have access to me, I'm frozen. So how you do that is you go through the credit bureaus. You can just click through and choose credit freeze. They give you a PIN number that's your information. So again, thinking about kind of how do you keep that PIN information safe and away from other folks that don't need to have it. And then anytime if I wanted to go out and get a new credit card or apply for credit in some way, I could turn off that freeze, and then and they usually say, how long do you want this off? And I could say for 5 days or for 2 days or for a month, and then it will come back on. Another option that you can do, especially, and people are doing this more and more, is freezing, if you have children, freezing your child accounts, because sometimes children's accounts are stolen and then they don't really know that they're stolen until they're 18, 19, trying to pull credit, trying to get their own credit, and they see that, oh my gosh, somebody used my credit at some point in my life. So that's another option that some states have. So how do we, dealing with this, how do we rebuild our credit? And what are some of the things? One of the things, of course, is to pay our bills on time. Another option is to get a secure credit card. And a secure credit card is anytime that you're applying for a credit card, you put a certain amount of money down, like $300, and that becomes your limit. That is secured so that they keep that. So if you don't pay your credit card back, they can use that money. So it's a less of a risk for the credit card company. If you look online, you can just even look for the best secure credit cards. There's some great credit organizations out there that will show some of the best secure credit card options. And so that might be another option. Another thing you can think about is getting a cosigner. You can see that all of these strategies also have concerns. So one of the things to think about with a cosigner is, what are the power dynamics that happens with that cosigner? Is there someone that you trust? I've had a lot of folks for whom a cosigner has become then an abusive party because of that power dynamic. So thinking very carefully about whether or not a cosigner. Sometimes people use a store credit card to rebuild their credit because it's easier to get a store credit card. And then it also, you can really limit the amount of time that you're using that credit card. We can also build non-traditional credit, which we talked about earlier. And then there are also some organizations, that credit unions have programs where you can get an account that is just for building credit. You put money in that account, and then every month you put money in that account, they loan that money back to you, and every month you pay that back. And that by doing that, you're building your credit. So that's another option for folks. One of the things I wanted to mention is, if you do have some old credit, for example, you have and you want to rebuild your credit in a shorter amount of time, you have maybe a 4-year-old collections account. You can negotiate with collections folks to pay for less than the amount. So what happens is, so let's say I have loaned a bunch of money. I have $500 that I got from a credit card company. Then that was 4 years ago. And that credit card company tried to call me. They tried to collect it from me. They put it into collections. That collections agency kind of gave up on giving that getting that from me. So they sold that debt to another collections agency, but they sold it to them for way less than it was, $500. No, they probably bought it for maybe $100. So if I call that new company and I say, hey, I would like to settle my debt for $200 for this $500 thing, if you will consider that settled in full, that company can make that negotiation with me. If they agree to do that, I want to make sure I get that in writing. I want to make sure that I send them a cashier's check that says for payment in full, and that says that on the cashier's check, because once they cash that check, if it's a cashier's check that is clearly stating that that's for payment in full, that is a contract that they now have cashed that check, that should show up on your credit report as settled. It is a settled account, which is better for your credit report, credit score, than having a collections account, and you paid much less than that $500. You can also negotiate fees with that. The one thing to keep in mind is if you do that, that money that company is giving you is considered a forgiveness, and it's considered a gift. So the company is actually charging off that money. They are not paying taxes on that money. So the company then is going to send you what is called a 1099, which says that you basically were gifted $300 by this company. So that will become now part of your taxable income. So depending on your tax bracket, that may impact your tax refund, and it may not, just depending on what that is. But I don't want that to be a surprise for folks if you're negotiating to pay back a collections bill. So it is, it's 12:29. I'm sorry I didn't leave much time for questions, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I also love doing this work. I feel passionate about it and excited about it. And this is my email, so I would love to talk with you about it at any time, or if you want to help getting connected to folks in your community. But I do have time for 1 or 2 questions if anybody has anything.
All right, Katie, we do have a question.
Okay.
Are there expungement laws that protect consumers who have had their credit info stolen and in debt due to abuse or identity theft?
So no, most states do not. And so it becomes a huge fight to get that stuff off your credit report. And you can do it, it can happen. And there are some states that are moving forward in a more, in a better way. So Texas has some laws about that. New York is working on some legislation. California's been working on legislation. So you would have to look at in your area, but most states do not have expungement laws. However, you know, that is something that we can continue to work on and get that off your credit report. I know the CSAJ, which is an organization that I do a lot of work with, we've been working on a lot of coerced debt legislation, because this is something that we really hope will change in the next 5 years, that there will be a way for people to get stuff off their credit report and those types of laws. Any other questions?
Please, guys, ask any questions if you have it. You can also email me at roxy@htlegalcenter.org, and then I'll forward it to our presenter. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions.
All right. Well, I hope that people reach out. This was so much fun. Hope that you gained some information.
I want to thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today and giving out so much information regarding credit. I think this was a great opportunity for survivors as well as service providers to kind of learn how this process goes and what type of barriers survivors face when it comes to gaining or making credit. So if there aren't any other questions, we're kind of 2 minutes over. I just want to I just love this. Thank you so much. I want to thank you so much. And Savannah, thank you so much for joining us for Survivor Alliance. I will leave the webinar up for just a few moments for those who have not had the opportunity to download the handouts. The handouts includes a PowerPoint as well as an agenda to this webinar presentation, some information for the Human Trafficking Legal Center and the services that we provide, as well as a handout for Survivor Alliance. If you want to learn more, or if you know a survivor who would benefit from that organization, you can click on that and download it and share it with them. All right, guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And I want to make a quick announcement. We have another webinar coming up October 29th. This one's going to be great. So if you want to join us, please send an email, or please look at your email. I'll send an invite to you. This one's going to be on expungement in the US and vacatures. So it's going to be really exciting, and I hope everyone joins us. Okay. All right. If there aren't any more questions, please look at your email. I will be sending a copy of the handouts if anyone's having trouble with downloading them. And then if you want a copy of today's recorded webinar and you are a survivor, please reach out to my email and I will be happy to share this with you. Okay? All right.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to be clear also, expungement laws might be more clear in terms of identity theft. It's much harder when we're talking about coerced debt. And so if we have some legal action on identity theft, there's much more clear action than if we have coerced debt. So I'm sorry, I should have been more clear on that.
Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to put my email in the chat box if you can see it so that you guys can just copy it and paste it into your email. All right. All right. Okay, guys, thank you so much. And I will bid everyone farewell. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. See you soon. Katie, are you still there?
Yeah.
Hi, sorry, can you press the end button? Because
Oh yeah, where is that? Where, let's see. End. Talking, everyone. Should I do leave the webinar or end?
yes, that's it. End.
I don't see it.
You could leave the webinar too. I just
Okay.
don't have the capacity to do so since you're the presenter right now, but it's okay.
All right. I hope that was okay.
That was excellent, Katie. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate the survivor-centered approach you took on that, and just explaining the different types of barriers that we come across as survivors, and just trying to get back into the world. You know, credit is a hard thing to establish, and especially if you never have the opportunity to establish it before another person destroys it, it takes a really long time to build that credibility back up in the world. And it affects everything from job opportunities to moving to trying to even get a cell phone to communicate. So I really appreciate this information.
Good, good. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope we are cross paths again. All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. Oh, here it is.